My sister laughed when I told the story. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable one. A clean, confident laugh, sharp enough to cut through the room. "That never happened," she said, shaking her head like I'd just told the most ridiculous joke. "You've always had such a dramatic imagination." The room went quiet, not because people believed her, but because no one knew what to do next. I stood there, holding my glass so tightly my fingers ached, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Family gatherings have a way of making you feel 12 years old again, even when you're grown, even when you've survived things that should have aged you past caring. "I'm not lying," I said. She smiled wider. "You really are," she replied, shrugging. "I think you've told that story so many times, you actually believe it." That's how she did it. Never raised her voice, never lost her composure. She didn't need to, because she knew something I didn't, something she'd relied on our entire lives. People wanted to believe her. We were sitting in my cousin's living room, surrounded by half-empty plates and polite post-dinner chatter. Someone had asked an innocent question. What was it like growing up in that old house on Willow Street? I answered honestly. I said it was hard. I said it was loud. I said it was frightening. I mentioned the nights, the yelling, the locked doors, the times we didn't eat. I didn't even go into detail. I didn't need to. The words alone were enough to make the air heavy. That's when my sister cut in. "Oh my God," she said, laughing. "Here we go again." I turned to look at her. She met my eyes without flinching. "We had a normal childhood," she continued, still smiling. "Sure, Mom and Dad argued like everyone else, but that's it. She just likes attention." Attention. The same word she'd used when we were kids. The same word she'd used when I cried too loudly, flinched too obviously, remembered too clearly. My cousin shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. "I remember things differently," I said. "Well," she replied, shrugging, "memory isn't always reliable, especially when you want to be a victim." That word hit harder than any insult she could have chosen. Victim. It carried judgment, dismissal, finality. I felt the familiar pressure in my chest, the instinct to back down, to soften, to apologize for making things awkward. But something in me had changed. "I'm not asking you to agree," I said quietly. "I'm asking you to stop calling me a liar." She tilted her head, studying me like I was a puzzle she'd already solved. "I'm not calling you a liar," she said sweetly. "I'm saying you're mistaken." The difference mattered to her. It didn't matter to me. After that night, the story spread. Not the truth, her version. I heard about it in pieces, through relatives who meant well but didn't know what to say, through friends who suddenly asked careful questions, through that subtle shift in tone when people stop listening and start evaluating. "She's worried about you," my aunt told me on the phone. "She thinks you might need help," another relative said gently. "You know how your sister is," someone else added, as if that explained everything. Yes, I knew exactly how she was. She'd always been good at rewriting reality. Growing up, she was the golden one, the calm one, the responsible one, the one teachers praised and neighbors trusted. I was the sensitive one, the one who cried too easily, the one who overreacted, the one whose stories were always just a little too much. When our father drank and slammed doors, she said he was just stressed. When our mother disappeared for days at a time, she said she needed space. When I hid in my room and counted footsteps so I'd know who was coming down the hall, she told me to stop being dramatic. "You're embarrassing us," she'd whisper. "People will think we're messed up." And I learned, slowly, painfully, that silence was safer than truth. So when she stood there as an adult, poised, confident, surrounded by people ready to believe her, and called me mistaken, I felt that old fear rise up again. But this time, I didn't swallow it. I went home and opened a box I hadn't touched in years. The box sat on the top shelf of my closet, pushed so far back I'd almost forgotten it was there. Dust coated the lid. My hands shook slightly as I pulled it down and set it on the floor. Inside were pieces of a life no one wanted to acknowledge. Old notebooks, a cracked cassette tape, folded letters written in handwriting I hadn't seen since childhood, and photographs. Not the smiling ones people frame and display, the other kind. A picture of the front door with a chain lock installed on the outside. A photo of my bedroom window, bars visible behind the curtains. A snapshot of the kitchen table, empty except for a single can of soup. I sat on the floor for a long time, surrounded by proof, and still I knew it wouldn't be enough, because evidence only matters if people are willing to see it, and my sister had spent years making sure they weren't. The breaking point came a week later. We were at our mother's house, another gathering, another attempt at pretending. I'd almost skipped it, but something in me refused to retreat again. I mentioned therapy casually, in passing. "It's helped me process some of what we went through," I said. My sister's fork clinked loudly against her plate.
"Please don't," she said. "Don't what?" I asked. "Don't do this here," she replied. "Don't drag everyone into your narrative." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's my life," I said. "I'm allowed to talk about it." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're allowed to talk," she said. "You're not allowed to rewrite history." That's when she turned to the room. "She's always been like this," she said lightly. "She takes normal things and turns them into trauma. Honestly, I worry she believes her own stories." I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. That hurt more than her words. "I'm done being quiet," I said. She laughed again, soft, incredulous. "You really think everyone else is wrong and you're right?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer, and that's when the doorbell rang. My mother frowned. "Were we expecting someone?" "No," my sister said, already standing. "I'll get it." I stayed seated, heart pounding for reasons I didn't yet understand. A moment later, voices drifted in from the hallway. A man's voice, older, unfamiliar. "I'm sorry to intrude," he was saying. "I heard you were all together, and I thought I should finally say something." My sister froze in the doorway. I saw it on her face first. Recognition. Fear. She stepped aside slowly, and that's when I saw him. Mr. Calder, our old neighbor, the man who used to live 2 houses down on Willow Street, the one who used to slip me a sandwich when he thought no one was looking, the one who asked questions no one answered. He looked older now, thinner, but his eyes were the same. He looked straight at me. "I hope it's okay that I'm here," he said gently. "I heard what was being said, and I can't keep quiet anymore." The room went completely still. My sister's face had gone pale. "I think," Mr. Calder continued, "that your sister deserves to be believed." My heart stopped. He turned to the rest of the room. "I lived next door for 12 years, he said, "and I remember things very clearly." My sister opened her mouth. "No," she said sharply, "you're confused." He didn't look at her. "I remember the shouting," he said, "the police visits, the nights the lights stayed off."
"I remember seeing her," he nodded toward me, "sitting on the steps for hours because she wasn't allowed back inside." The room felt like it was tilting. "I remember calling social services," he added quietly, "more than once." My sister's voice shook. "That's not true. You don't know what you're talking about." He finally looked at her then. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," he said calmly. "I just regret not speaking sooner." No one spoke. No one moved. I felt tears spill down my face, not from sadness, but from something closer to relief, because for the first time in my life, the truth had a witness. And my sister, she looked like she just realized that the story she'd been telling for decades was finally about to fall apart. No one spoke for a long moment. the kind of silence that feels loud, heavy, impossible to ignore. My sister was the first to move. She laughed, too quickly, too brightly. "This is ridiculous," she said, waving a hand like she was brushing away smoke. "You're mistaken. You're mixing us up with another family." Mr. Calder didn't flinch. "I'm not," he said simply. I watched her then, really watched her, and saw something I'd never seen so clearly before. Panic. Not loud panic, not frantic panic, controlled panic. The kind that scrambles behind the eyes while the mouth keeps smiling. "You barely knew us," she said, crossing her arms. "You were just a neighbor." "I knew enough," he replied. "I knew when things weren't right." My mother stood frozen near the table, one hand gripping the back of a chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. My cousins stared at Mr. Calder like he'd just walked out of a different timeline. I felt like I couldn't breathe, not because I was afraid, because the truth, my truth, was finally out of my body and standing in the room. "I remember one night in particular," Mr. Calder continued, his voice steady but thick with something unsaid. "It was winter, late, snow on the ground." My sister shook her head sharply. "Stop, you're embarrassing yourself." He ignored her. "I heard shouting, louder than usual. Then a door slammed so hard it rattled my windows. My stomach twisted. I looked outside," he continued, "and I saw her." He pointed gently toward me. She couldn't have been more than 13, barefoot, no coat, sitting on the front steps with her knees pulled to her chest. The room felt like it was shrinking. "She sat there for nearly 2 hours," he said. "I remember because I kept checking the clock, telling myself someone would let her back in." My sister's voice rose. "Why didn't you call the police?" "I did," he replied. "They came, they talked, they left." I swallowed hard.
"I offered to let her come inside my house," he added, turning to me. "Do you remember that?" I nodded slowly. "Yes," I whispered. "You brought me a blanket." My sister scoffed. "This is insane." Mr. Calder finally turned fully toward her. "No," he said. "What's insane is pretending this never happened." The room erupted then. Not yelling, but voices overlapping, questions spilling out, the careful distance people had kept suddenly collapsing. "Police?" my cousin asked. "Social services?" another whispered. "Why didn't we know?" someone else said. My sister raised her voice, trying to regain control. "Because it didn't happen like that," she snapped. "You were always dramatic. You liked attention. You'd sit outside on purpose just to make us look bad." The words hit me like a slap. I stood up so suddenly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I was locked out," I said. My voice shook, but it didn't break. "I was locked out because Dad was drunk and Mom was gone. I didn't sit there for attention. I sat there because I had nowhere else to go." My sister stared at me like she'd never seen me before. "You're exaggerating. You always do." Mr. Calder stepped forward slightly. "She's not," he said, "and I can prove it." That finally stopped her. "What do you mean?" my aunt asked. Mr. Calder reached into his coat pocket. "I didn't come here on a whim," he said. "I came because I heard what was being said, and I realized I still had something." He pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, creased at the edges. "I kept records," he said quietly. "Not officially, just notes, dates, times, who I called." He unfolded the paper carefully. "This is from January 14th, he said, 12 years ago. My sister's face drained of color. "It says, child locked out again, father intoxicated, mother absent, called non-emergency police line at 10:43 p.m. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. "That's impossible," my sister whispered. "It's not," he replied, "because I wrote it the same night." My mother finally spoke. Her voice was barely audible. "Is that true?" No one answered her. Not me, not my sister. The truth was bigger than any one of us now. "I didn't know it was that bad," my mother said, eyes filling with tears. Mr. Calder turned to her. "With respect," he said gently, "you did. She shook her head. I was working 2 jobs. I was exhausted. I didn't. You left her alone, I said quietly.
The words felt strange on my tongue. Powerful. You left both of us alone, my sister snapped, spinning toward me. I had to grow up fast because of you. I laughed then, a hollow sound. No, I said. You grew up learning how to survive by pretending nothing was wrong. I grew up surviving by noticing everything. The room went still again. My sister's composure finally cracked. You want to know why I don't remember it like you do? She said, voice shaking now. Because I couldn't afford to. There were tears in her eyes. If I admitted it was that bad, then everything fell apart, she continued. So I didn't. I made it smaller. I made it normal. She laughed bitterly. And you wouldn't stop talking about it. You kept reminding me. I stared at her. So you erased it, I said. She didn't deny it. You ruined things, she said softly. You made people uncomfortable. Mr. Calder shook his head slowly. No, he said. What ruined things was what happened behind closed doors. After that, the gathering ended abruptly. People left in awkward clusters, murmuring to one another, avoiding eye contact like they'd just witnessed something they didn't know how to process. Mr. Calder stayed. So did I. My sister disappeared into the kitchen, slamming a cabinet door hard enough to echo. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. I'm sorry, Mr. Calder said quietly. I should have spoken up sooner. I looked at him. You did what you could, I replied. You tried. He nodded, eyes misty. I was younger. I thought calling was enough. I didn't realize how easy it was for things to be dismissed. I reached out and squeezed his hand. Thank you for remembering, I said. My phone buzzed later that night. A text from my sister. You humiliated me. I stared at the screen. Then typed back. You erased me. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. You don't know how hard it was for me. I didn't respond, because for the first time, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about convincing her anymore. This was about reclaiming my own story. The next day, calls started coming in. Relatives, old friends, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some apologized, some asked questions. Some admitted they'd always suspected something was off but didn't want to push, and some, quietly, thanked me. I went through something similar, one cousin admitted. I thought I was crazy for remembering it differently, another said. I realized then how powerful denial can be, and how dangerous. My sister didn't speak to me for weeks after that. When she finally did, it wasn't an apology. It was a message. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying it didn't happen the way you say it did. I read it twice, then closed my phone. That was as close as she was willing to come to the truth, and for the first time in my life, I didn't chase her there. A few days later, I met Mr. Calder for coffee. He brought more papers, old notes, times, even a copy of a letter he'd once written to social services that never got a response. I don't want these anymore, he said, sliding them across the table. I think they belong to you. I held them like they were fragile. Why keep them all this time? I asked. He smiled sadly. Because I was afraid someone would say I imagined it. That hit me harder than anything else. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table again, but this time, I wasn't surrounded by doubt. I was surrounded by proof. Not just paper, but people. Memory shared stops being madness, and for the first time, the weight I'd carrying for decades shifted. My sister had built her version of the past on silence, and silence, I'd learned, can survive a long time, but it doesn't survive witnesses. And now, the past was no longer something she could rewrite alone, because an old neighbor had stepped forward,
and everything was changing. The shift didn't happen loudly. There was no dramatic confrontation the next morning, no viral post, no family-wide apology tour. What happened instead was quieter and far more unsettling. People started remembering. It began with a phone call from my aunt.
The same aunt who, just days earlier, had told me gently that every family has its ups and downs and that maybe I should stop living in the past. Her voice sounded different now, unsteady. "I couldn't sleep last night," she said, "after what your neighbor said." I said nothing. "I kept thinking about Willow Street," she continued, "about how tense it always felt. How your father never let anyone inside." My chest tightened. "And then," she said, lowering her voice, "I remembered a night you stayed with us. You were shaking. You wouldn't eat." I closed my eyes. "I asked your mother what happened," she went on. "She told me you'd had a nightmare." A pause. I believed her. The word landed heavy. "I'm sorry," my aunt whispered. I thanked her. But after we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall, realizing something painful and important at the same time. Belief had always been a choice. My sister didn't reach out again that week, but she didn't need to. I could feel the ground shifting under her version of reality. Family group chats went quiet, invitations stalled. Conversations that once flowed easily now stumbled, cautious and restrained. People didn't confront her directly. They did something far worse. They stopped automatically agreeing. I learned later that my cousin had asked her a question, just one. Why would he lie? She'd asked. The neighbor. What would he gain? According to my cousin, my sister didn't answer. She changed the subject. That was her tell. The memories came back to me, too. Not in flashes like they used to, sharp, overwhelming, impossible to control, but in fragments that suddenly made sense now that they weren't being denied. The smell of beer soaked into the carpet, the sound of the chain on the door sliding into place, the way I used to sleep in layers of clothes because I never knew when I'd be forced outside. And my sister, always watching, always listening, always adjusting. I used to think she didn't see it. Now I knew she did. She just chose survival through denial. A week after the gathering, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. But avoidance had cost me too much already.
"Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice sounded small. "Yes," I said. "We met at a cafe halfway between our houses. Neutral ground, public enough to keep us both honest." She looked older than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. She stirred her coffee without drinking it. "I didn't protect you," she said suddenly. The directness startled me. "I told myself you were exaggerating," she continued, "because if you weren't, then I failed." I swallowed hard. "You did fail," I said quietly. She flinched, but she didn't argue. "I know," she whispered, "and I don't know how to live with that." I looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for accountability. "I'm not asking you to live with it," I said. "I'm asking you to stop denying it." She nodded slowly. "I won't anymore," she said. I believed her. But belief didn't mean reconciliation. It just meant the truth finally had space. My sister found out about that meeting within days. She called me that night. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me this conversation was inevitable. "What did you say to her?" she demanded the moment I answered. "I told her the truth," I replied. "You turned her against me," she snapped. I laughed, once, quietly. "You did that yourself," I said. Her voice rose. "You always do this. You push and push until everything falls apart." "No," I replied calmly. Things fall apart when they're built on lies. Silence. Then softer. You don't understand what it was like for me. I closed my eyes. You're right, I don't. Because you had a door that stayed open. Her breathing hitched. I was older, she said. I knew how to stay out of the way. And I didn't, I replied. So I paid for it. She didn't deny that either. That hurt more than if she had. The turning point came unexpectedly. It wasn't another family gathering or confrontation. It was an email from my sister's former best friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. The subject line read, "I should have said something sooner." My hands shook as I opened it.
She wrote about sleepovers she'd stopped having at our house because things felt off. About how my sister had once warned her never to mention what she'd heard through the walls. About the night she saw me sitting on the front steps and asked my sister why. "She told me you were being punished," the email read. I believed her. I was a kid too. Tears blurred my vision. "I've thought about that night for years," she wrote. "I'm sorry I didn't question it." I replied with a single sentence. "Thank you for remembering." When word of that email reached my sister, she lost control. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, pounding on the door. "You're ruining my life," she shouted through the wood. I opened the door calmly. "I'm telling the truth," I said. "You're obsessed," she screamed. "You want to be the damaged one so badly." I stepped back, letting her words echo in the hallway. "I wanted to be safe," I said. "I wanted to be believed." She stared at me, chest heaving. "Why can't you let it go?" she whispered. Because letting it go had nearly destroyed me, I thought. Instead, I said, "Because it didn't let go of me." She sank against the wall, suddenly smaller. "I did what I had to do," she said quietly. "So did I," I replied. She left without another word. After that, something in me settled. Not peace, resolution. I stopped explaining myself, stopped justifying, stopped softening the edges of the truth to make others comfortable. When people asked, I answered honestly. When they doubted, I didn't argue, because doubt no longer defined me. Mr. Calder and I stayed in touch. He told me he'd started speaking up more, about other things, other moments he'd once dismissed as not his place. "I didn't realize how long silence could last," he said one afternoon, "or how heavy it could become." I nodded. "Silence protects the wrong people," I replied. The last time my sister and I spoke, it was brief. She sent a message. I remember some of it now. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I replied, "That's your work to do, not mine." She didn't answer. What surprised me most wasn't that people believed me eventually. It was how many had always suspected something and said nothing. Because saying nothing was easier. Because questioning would have required courage. And courage, I learned, is contagious. So is truth. I began writing things down, not for proof, for myself, so that my story existed somewhere outside my body, so it couldn't be erased again. Each memory I wrote felt less like a wound and more like a scar, still visible but no longer bleeding. One evening, months later, I walked past the old neighborhood. Willow Street hadn't changed much. Different families, fresh paint, but the house was still there. I stood across the street and looked at it, not with fear, not with longing, but with distance. It no longer owned me. The past had tried to stay buried, but it failed, because someone remembered, because someone spoke, because silence finally broke. My sister claimed I was lying about our past. She built her identity on that claim, but denial can't survive witnesses. And when the old neighbor stepped forward, he didn't just validate my memories. He returned something I thought I'd lost forever, my voice. And this time, I wasn't giving it back. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They came in waves, quiet, relentless, reshaping everything they touched. The first real change showed up at a family funeral, not mine, a distant relative's, the kind of event where history usually gets smoothed over with polite smiles and selective memory. I almost didn't go, but something in me refused to disappear again. The church was packed, the air thick with perfume and old hymns. I slid into a pew near the back, hands folded, heart steady. I wasn't scanning the room anymore. I wasn't preparing for impact. That alone felt like progress. My sister arrived 10 minutes later. She stopped when she saw me. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough for me to notice. She chose a seat several rows ahead, back straight, chin lifted, the posture she always used when she felt exposed. People greeted her warmly, then subtly, less warmly than before. I watched it happen in small moments.
A pause before a hug, a question left unanswered, a look exchanged between two relatives that used to include her automatically and now didn't. She felt it. I could see it in the way her shoulders stiffened. For the first time in our lives, the room wasn't hers by default. After the service, people gathered outside in clusters. My aunt approached me quietly. "I spoke to Mr. Calder," she said. I nodded. "He showed me the notes," she continued, "the dates, the calls." I said nothing. "I believed your sister for years," she admitted, "because she was easier to believe. That hurt more than I expected." "Easier how?" I asked. "She didn't ask us to change anything," my aunt replied. "Believing you would require action." There it was. Belief costs something. Denial is cheap. My sister didn't speak to me at the funeral. She didn't have to. Her discomfort spoke loudly enough. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Everyone is treating me like a villain." I stared at it for a long time, then typed back. That's what happens when the truth stops being optional. 3 dots appeared, disappeared. Then, "I didn't hurt you on purpose." My fingers hovered over the screen. "Intent doesn't erase impact," I typed. "You don't get to rewrite my pain because yours felt inconvenient." She didn't reply. The next escalation came from somewhere unexpected. Our father. He hadn't reached out since the gathering. Not a call, not a text. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I didn't. "I hear you've been telling stories again," he said, without greeting. I closed my eyes. "They're not stories, they're memories." "You're exaggerating," he snapped. "You always were dramatic." The words felt small now. "I locked me out," I said calmly. Silence. "I don't remember that," he said, finally.
"I do," I replied. "You're trying to ruin this family," he said. "No," I said, "I'm refusing to protect it with lies." He hung up. And something unexpected happened. I felt lighter, because the truth didn't need his permission anymore. My sister tried a different tactic next. Concern. She reached out to people I knew, friends, coworkers, distant relatives, with soft warnings. "She's struggling," she'd say. "She's processing trauma that may not be accurate. I'm worried about her mental health." I heard about it secondhand. At first, it stung. Then I realized something. She wasn't denying anymore. She was discrediting, which meant the truth had landed. One evening, I received a message from a coworker. "Hey, just wanted you to know, if anyone questions your past, I believe you." I stared at the screen, heart pounding, not because I needed validation, because belief was finally moving outward, uncontainable. The most painful conversation came with my mother. Again, we met at her house this time, the same house she'd lived in for years, filled with carefully arranged furniture and unspoken rules. She sat across from me at the dining table. I feel like I failed both of you, she said. I didn't interrupt. I protected her by denying you, and I protected myself by pretending I didn't see. Yes, I said. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. I leaned forward. You can't fix the past, but you can stop defending it. She nodded again. I will, she said, and for the first time, I believed her. My sister found out about that conversation too. She called me late that night. You turned Mom against me, she said, voice shaking. No, I replied. She turned toward the truth. You always wanted her on your side, she accused. I laughed softly. I wanted safety. Sides were your invention. She was quiet.
Then, do you know how hard it is to realize your whole childhood might not be what you thought? Yes, I said gently. I've lived with that my entire life. She hung up. The next few weeks were strangely calm, not peaceful, but steady. I stopped being the topic of whispered conversations. I became something else, a reference point. People began asking questions, real ones, not about details, about how denial works, about why families protect certain narratives, about how silence spreads. I didn't preach. I answered. Mr. Calder called me one afternoon. I spoke at a neighborhood meeting, he said, about something I witnessed years ago. I smiled. Good, I said. I realized something, he continued. Silence ages badly. Truth doesn't. He was right. My sister withdrew. She stopped attending gatherings, declined invitations, stayed home. At first, people worried about her. Then they noticed a pattern. She only showed up when she could control the story. Without that power, she didn't know how to exist. The final confrontation happened unexpectedly, at the grocery store, of all places. I was in the produce aisle, comparing apples, when I felt someone behind me. I turned. It was her. She looked tired, older, stripped of the polish she'd always worn like armor. I remember it now, she said quietly. I waited. The night you were locked out, she continued, I remember watching from my room. My chest tightened. You didn't say anything, I said. I couldn't, she whispered. If I did, everything would have collapsed. I studied her. And letting me carry it alone was easier? I said. She nodded. I'm sorry, she said. The word hung between us. It wasn't enough.
But it was real. I can't give you forgiveness right now, I said honestly. But I can give you this. I met her eyes. You don't get to deny me anymore. She nodded again. I won't, she said. We stood there, surrounded by strangers selecting fruit, the weight of decades between us. I was living. The final shift came from somewhere I didn't expect. My sister sent me a letter, not a text, not a voicemail, a letter. I recognized her handwriting immediately, precise, controlled, careful, like everything she did. I let it sit on the table for an entire day before opening it, not because I was afraid of what it might say, because I no longer felt obligated to rush toward her emotions. That alone felt revolutionary. The letter wasn't long. There were no excuses, no justifications, just acknowledgement. She wrote about memory, how fragile it is, how selective, how easy it is to confuse survival with truth. She admitted she'd spent years convincing herself that if she denied what happened, it would stop existing. It didn't. She wrote about fear, how admitting the past meant accepting that the people who were supposed to protect us didn't, and how that realization had felt unbearable. She wrote about me, not as dramatic, not as unstable, not as mistaken,
but as someone who carried what she couldn't. The letter ended with one sentence: "I don't expect forgiveness. I just don't want to be the one who lies anymore." I folded it carefully, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel pressure to respond. Forgiveness is a strange thing. People talk about it like it's a destination, something you arrive at if you're good enough, healed enough, evolved enough. I've learned it's not. It's a process, a negotiation, sometimes a boundary. What I felt toward my sister wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was no longer rage. It was clarity, and clarity is powerful. Months passed. Family dynamics shifted again, this time more honestly. Conversations were slower, less polished, sometimes uncomfortable, but real. The people who mattered stayed. The ones who needed denial to feel safe drifted away, and I let them, because the cost of keeping them had always been too high. One afternoon, I received an email from Mr. Calder's daughter. She'd found some of his old papers while helping him move and wanted to know if I'd like copies. Photos of Willow Street, old letters, things he'd saved without knowing why. I went to visit him a few weeks later. He looked tired, but peaceful. "I'm glad I spoke," he said, as we sat on his porch. "I didn't realize how much I'd been carrying." "Neither did I," I replied. We sat in companionable silence, watching leaves drift across the sidewalk. "Do you regret it?" he asked gently. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I regret how long I thought silence was the same as safety." He smiled. "So do I." I returned to Willow Street one last time, not to confront anything, not to reclaim anything, just to say goodbye. The house looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing, like a shadow that only looms when you're standing too close. I stood across the street and let the memories surface, not as threats, but as facts. This happened. I survived. It shaped me, but it doesn't own me. I turned away without looking back. My sister and I eventually met again, not at a family event, not with an audience, just the two of us, sitting on a bench in a park neither of us had any history with. She looked nervous. I felt calm. "I don't know how to be your sister now," she said quietly. "I don't know either," I replied honestly. "But it can't be built on denial." She nodded. "I know." We sat there, not trying to fix anything, just letting reality exist between us. That was enough for that day. People sometimes ask if telling the truth was worth it, if it caused more pain than it healed. I answer them honestly. Yes, because pain that's acknowledged can heal. Pain that's denied just multiplies. I've learned that families don't fall apart because of truth. They fall apart because of the effort it takes to maintain lies. And when someone stops participating in that effort, the structure reveals its cracks. That isn't destruction, it's exposure. My sister claimed I was lying about our past. For years, that claim kept me small, confused, silent, until someone else remembered, until someone else spoke, until the story no longer belonged to just the people who benefited from forgetting. When the old neighbor stepped forward, he didn't just validate my experience, he reminded me of something essential. Truth doesn't need consensus. It needs courage. I carry my past differently now, not as a burden, but as a reference point. It taught me how to recognize gaslighting, how to spot denial dressed up as peace, how to trust myself even when others don't. Most importantly, it taught me this: if you are the only one telling the truth in a room, you are not wrong. You are early. I no longer need witnesses to believe myself, but I'm grateful for the ones who stood up anyway, because sometimes one voice is all it takes to dismantle decades of silence. And once the silence breaks, the truth finally gets to breathe.